Again, I would like to thank you all for your interest and for you all being the voice of the Vietnamese American community here in the United States. As you all know, the history of Vietnam and the history of Vietnamese Americans is a history bathed in tears, a history of unbearable suffering, but also a history with a proclamation of hope. April 30th, 1975 was the day of infamy for the millions of Vietnamese whose future was dashed when their freedom was extinguished by the brutal assault on South Vietnam by communist forces in blatant violation of the 1973 Paris Peace Accord. Having known or faced communist cruelty, thousands of Vietnamese left their homes and family, climbing and clambering over one another to fight for space on that last plane, on that last boat to escape imminent atrocities. What transpired in Vietnam after the communist takeover could only be described by analogously linking the tragedy of Vietnam to such unconscionable events in human history as the Holocaust, the killing fields, and the Great Purge. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, the communist government arrested and forcibly detained hundreds of thousands of former military personnel who were loyal to the Republic of South Vietnam and threw them into Nazi-style concentration camps along with thousands of political dissidents. Viewing religion as an existential threat to communist orthodoxy, churches and temples were shut down and religious leaders were arrested and sent to prison like common criminals. Economic policy lacking scientific and philosophic justification were implemented with devastating effects as countless of thousands were evicted from their homes and sent to the new economic zones where many died of malaria and other deadly diseases. Facing starvation from ill-conceived economic policies, over 1 million Vietnamese left their home and country and set sail for the high seas, facing pirates, storms, and death to seek freedom and a new future in foreign lands. It is estimated that over 300,000 of these boat people perish in the oceans of the world. However, many successfully escaped and resettled in the United States. Through the generosity of the U.S. government and its people, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese were able to adjust to a new culture and become productive citizens. I am one of the many thousands who benefited from this generosity. I can recall very vividly and endearingly an elderly couple in Goshen, Indiana, who I would come to call Mamu and Papu, driving me to school, taking me to shopping, and buying me my very first snow sled. I, along with thousands of Vietnamese, became U.S. citizens for one simple reason: to defend the Constitution of the United States and in return be defended by the same Constitution. Vietnamese Americans now invoke this Constitution and respectfully request this Congress to protect them against the illegal expropriation of the land they left behind when they fled the evils of communism. Mr. Chairman, to make the story short, on April 4, 1977, the Communist Republic of Vietnam, SRV, issued an executive order placing the properties of Vietnamese who fled Vietnam under temporary state administration. Then in 1980, the SRV declared through its constitution that land belongs to the entire people, with the state as the representative owner, thereby declaring in principle its policy to nationalize all land. On December 29, 1987, the National Assembly proclaimed Vietnam's land law to implement this new policy, placing all land under the people's collective ownership and the government's administration. On July 14, 1993, the Vietnamese National Assembly passed a new land law declaring that the government shall not return land expropriated to its rightful owners once that land has been assigned to other entities. This law, however, affected only Vietnamese nationals. Not until 2003 did the National Assembly pass a resolution that allowed the state to expropriate land of Vietnamese Americans. The 2003 land law authorized the Vietnamese government to spurn any claim for the return of land already placed under the state administration prior to July 1st, 1991. This land law officially completed the process of nationalizing all land and housing under the administration of the state. Mr. Chairman and esteemed members of the subcommittee, Congress has been very clear in its intent that the United States shall not provide assistance to governments that have violated the rights of U.S. citizens. The Trade Act of 1974 requires that a beneficiary of the generalized system of preferences may not have nationalized, expropriated, or otherwise seized properties of U.S. citizens or corporations without providing or taking steps to provide prompt, adequate, and effective compensation, or submitting such issues to a mutually agreed forum for arbitration. 22 U.S.C. Section 2370 is explicit in its prohibition against the granting of assistance to countries that have nationalized, expropriated, or seized property of U.S. citizens, especially countries with communist ties. The statute mandates, in pertinent parts, that the President shall suspend assistance to the government of any country to which assistance is provided under this chapter or any other act when the government of such country or any government agency or subdivision within such country on or after January 1st, 1962 has nationalized or expropriated or seized ownership or control of property owned by any United States citizen. And in the statute itself, it explicitly mentions the Socialist Republic of Vietnam as one of the countries that assistance shall not be provided. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bass, and esteemed members of the subcommittee, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has failed to take appropriate steps to discharge its obligations under widely accepted general principle of international law to fully compensate Vietnamese Americans for properties unlawfully nationalized or expropriated. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam has failed to foster the establishment of any genuinely democratic system and respect for internationally recognized human rights, including the right to own property, right to political speech and expressions, right to freely practice any religion or belief, and the right to life. Instead of improving its human rights record, Vietnam has increased its repression of democratic ideals since obtaining its entry into the World Trade Organization in 2007. Its repression and aggression have been the greatest against religious institutions. As part of this wave of repression, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has aggressively expropriated land from religious communities, including the Catholics, the Montagnard Protestants, the Hmong Protestants, and the Khmer Krom Buddhists. The case of Con Yo Parish, that the chairman is very familiar with, illustrates the Vietnamese government's policy of wiping out an entire Catholic parish through expropriation of farmland, cemetery plots, and residential homes of parishioners. On May 4, 2010, the authorities even prohibited the burial of a 93-year-old parishioner in the parish cemetery. To make their act even more heinous, as parishioners proceeded with the funeral, the police attacked them brutally, causing injuries to over 100 parishioners, including the elderly and children. The police arrested 62 people and tortured them for days during detention, killing one of the detainees. Mr. Chairman and esteemed members of this subcommittee, the U.S. government should not be complicit in the repression of democratic ideals in Vietnam. This government should not be complicit in the Vietnamese government's infringement on the rights of U.S. citizens. We therefore request that this Congress to do the following. 1, demand the administration to stop all assistance to Vietnam as required by law, not ratify any trade agreements with Vietnam until Vietnam shows concrete improvements in the promotion of democracy and religious freedom for its people, and adequately compensate U.S. citizens for the land that they illegally expropriated. And 3, passed the Vietnam Human Rights Act and the Vietnam Sanctions Act. Again, I would like to thank the Chairman, Ranking Member Bass, and this subcommittee for providing me the opportunity to testify.
Congressman Cao, thank you very much for your testimony.